all know who this guy is, William Bond, the Permaculture Consultant. Take it away, William.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right, so this is a pile. It was a bigger pile earlier, but it's starting to fall now that I took the cage off. But this is a big pile of hot compost. If you learn how to do this exact hot composting method, you can fix all of your problems on your farm, whether it's animal diseases, like you don't even have to graze correctly if you make sure the organisms are in your soil. But if, what was that? You don't hear that? I can hear myself. It's throwing me off. I can yell though. Yeah, I can yell. If you don't mind, thank you. Or face it the other direction. Yes, but I'll start yelling. So this is a pile of hot compost. If you can figure out how to, and I'm going to teach you how to today, how to make a hot compost pile, you can fix all of the problems on your farm. Whether it's like animal diseases, let's say your cows get pink eye, you can fix that with compost. Let's say your sheep are getting bloat. A lot of people think it's because it's too much like clover and everything, but it's actually a biology issue in your soil. If you have a low yield in your garden, if you have pests in your garden, if you have pests in your orchard, if you have pests in your food forest or anything like that, all of it can be solved with compost. Now, what compost is you're basically just farming your microorganisms. You're giving them a place to inhabit, to multiply, to thrive, and replicate to the appropriate numbers that you need for healthy soil. And there are actually standards for healthy soil. Also, the benefits of a hot compost pile is I don't care about the ingredients necessarily that I'm using. The downside of a cold compost pile is I have to be super specific on what compost ingredients I'm using. Otherwise, I could just be pushing and propagating pathogens, or I could be pushing and propagating weed seeds and stuff like that. Cool thing about a hot compost pile is that the center of this pile gets anywhere between 130 to 165 degrees. Over 165 degrees, I want to be careful because then I can start compost fires. I've never personally seen it happen, but I've seen the aftermath of it, and usually people do compost by structures. It's a bad equation. But the center of this pile, once temperatures reach 135 degrees, the bad guys, the bad microbes can't stand that high temperature. The good microbes thrive in that high temperature, all the way up to 165. They thrive in that. So you're killing all the pathogens. So I can use, let's say I'm getting cow manure from my next door neighbor, but they've been having like a pink eye outbreak. I don't care because all those vibrios that cause pink eye are going to die in the center of this compost. Let's say I'm picking up, just found a tick. But let's say I'm picking up a bunch of grass seed that all has turned into seed heads and everything. That's not going to be propagated because all those seeds are going to die in the center of this compost once it hits 135 degrees. Now, a lot of people use compost as a planting medium. I'm here to tell you that's the least efficient way to use your compost. Remember, this is providing a perfect environment for all your good guys to thrive. So, if I can make a compost pile, I do the 3 flips. I heat up the center 3 different times, and then I let it sit and cure. Once that comes down to ambient temperature, so the center of that compost pile is no longer heating up. It's the ambient temperature. So if it's 100 degrees outside, it might be like 105, 110 inside the center of this pile, hopefully less. I can then take a handful of that, put that in a 500 micron mesh bag or a paint strainer, and I can dunk it in a bucket of water, strip off those microbes, and then I can take that and then that handful I took out, I can throw back and re-inoculate in my compost pile. And then I can take that bucket of water, I can dilute it up to 20 times, and then I can inoculate a field, I can inoculate my garden, I can do all kinds of stuff with that. It's called compost extract. It's different than compost tea. That's a whole class in and of itself. Yeah, we won't worry about the compost tea just yet. Just worry about compost and compost extracts. But I can inoculate everything that I own with that compost extract, and that's just with a handful of compost. Now, as long as I avoid compaction and anaerobic conditions, I can do 3 applications of compost extract right before a rain event, and I'm now removing myself from the fertilization cycle. I no longer have to worry about the fertility of my soil because the microbes are now taking care of that. Now let's talk about the fertility cycle within the soil. I have a tree right here. It shoots down sugars into the soil, also called exudates, that have a grocery list. That sugar feeds your bacteria, feeds your fungi. mostly bacteria, but in exchange for that sugar, they have to go get what's on that grocery list. So they go derive from the organic matter, the inorganic matter of the sand, silts, and clays, rocks in your soil. They'll release enzymes that break that stuff down, and then they will start extracting what that plant needs. Now that bacteria can't make that direct transaction between the tree and the nutrients that it derived, so it needs a predator to come in. This is where the soil food web comes in. So, like, the bacteria gets eaten by the predator, gets pooped out the other side, and then the plant benefits. That's a simplified version of the soil food web, but, like, you know the saying, I know there's, like, some satanic reasoning, or I guess relationship to it, but as above, so below. If you look at the savannas, the African savannas, you think of, like, the gazelle, right? You have your gazelle, and if you leave them by themselves, they're going to get too large, they're going to start dying of diseases. That's whenever you bring in, like, your cheetahs or your hyenas or your jackals. They come through and they keep manage of the gazelle population. They keep them in check, making sure they don't start dying from disease and then dying off. And then you have no more gazelle. That's what's going on in the soil as well. So the bacteria, think of them as gazelle. Think of your protozoa as the hyenas and jackals, and then think of your nematodes. A lot of people have bad connotation with nematodes. I'll say the majority of nematodes are actually good. The majority of nematodes are good guys. There's only like a few categories of nematodes that are actually bad guys. But the nematodes are like the top dogs, the lions, and then you have like your worms, which are like, we'll call them humans, because a human can kill lion, jackal, gazelle, all that stuff. But few other things can kill that human. Same thing with the worm. You only get into worm predators above the soil, really. But that's the benefit of this compost. I'm creating the soil food web in astronomical numbers, and I'm going to strip those organisms from this compost and apply them to my soils and have a permanent fix. So let's get into flipping this compost pile. The ingredients of this compost pile are, I think, roughly, whenever they made this, I didn't make this compost pile, but it's roughly half grass clippings, and then the other half is the combination of chicken manure plus their bedding over a course of time. So they combine that about half and half, and then they assembled it in a pile that's at least 1 cubic yard. It needs to be within 1 cubic yard, no greater than 3 cubic yards, because then the center is going to go anaerobic, and you don't want that. But at least 1 cubic yard. And this is the biggest mistake that I see people making, is that their compost pile is not big enough. Many people they'll make a compost pile about this big, and they're like, okay, that's good, because I don't really want to flip anything more than that. It's not big enough to create a whole ecosystem of microbes. So it needs to be at least 1 cubic yard. And then the second mistake that I see most people making is their moisture content. So if I were to take a handful, now what's on top is actually chicken manure, but if I were to grab this grass clipping right here, if I were to take a handful of this stuff and squeeze it as hard as I can, I should get 1 drop to form and fall from that squeezed material. Now, right now, we can see that this compost is a little bit dry. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take the top off this compost, and we'll view it as 3 different sections. The top, the middle, that's very, very hot, and then the bottom. I'm going to take the top off this compost, and I'm going to put it on this tarp right here. Now, what I'm going to show you guys is the most efficient way to flip your compost. A lot of people are familiar with the 18-day hot composting method, where you flip it 8 to 9 times. That works, and if you're brand new to composting, I recommend checking that out just to get used to flipping compost and all that. But this is a more advanced, more efficient form of flipping compost, where I'm going to take the top off. It's going to go on the tarp. And then the hot center is going to go back into my compost cage. This is 47 inches tall, and it's about 18 to 20 feet in length. And that'll give you just over 1 cubic yard. It's good to go over 1 cubic yard, because if I fill this up to a heaping pile in the center, after a couple of days, it's going to settle. So, and then you won't have 1 cubic yard anymore. So go over 1 cubic yard. But I'm going to take the top off. I'm going to put it on this tarp. And then the center is going to go into the compost cage. The top is then going to become the new middle. And then the bottom is going to become the new top. So if you think of it in 3 different layers, everything is just moving down one. And that bottom layer is going to come out and then back on top. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And if anybody has any compost questions, let me know. I know it can be kind of tricky to people who are just brand new at it. Some people get frustrated with it. Go ahead. Yes. So Well, no, you're not baking it. That's not the reasoning behind it. But yes, you always want to cover your compost. The reason for that is because you want to minimize the amount of moisture. Because whenever I make and assemble the pile, I've hydrated everything appropriately, and I want that hydration to stay in here. So if I leave it uncovered and it's a hot, sunny day, it's not hot, but it's a sunny day, there's going to be a lot of evaporation going on. So a lot of the moisture of this pile is going to leave the pile. So I always cover it. Try not to have direct contact between your tarp and your compost pile, because that's going to create an anaerobic layer where the compost comes in contact with the tarp. So try to have it just barely above the pile if at all possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this top off, and if I see any clumps, I'm going to fluff it up. I'm going to address any issues that I see as they appear. You look a lot like Dr. Elaine Ingham, just saying, who taught me this stuff. Okay, you look close enough where you could actually be telling me the truth, or you could be messing with me, and I don't know. Okay. All right, that didn't pick up. So the pitchfork I like to use is 5-tine. Unless I have like a lot of stringy material, I'll use a 3-tine pitchfork or a hay fork. But I like to use a 4 or 5-tine generally to flip compost. But yeah, this is basically what I'm going to do. Any clumps or anything like that, I'm just going to flip up or flip around and fluff up and stuff like that. And once I get like a solid layer, then I'll break out the hose and start rehydrating everything. So like now would be a good time for anybody's questions, because I'm going to be flipping for a minute. And don't worry about raising your hand, just shout them out. You said a possum? Okay. And I had a file, although maybe not entirely close. Yeah. I put that on top of the bed of planting, and I'm planning to go home and plant something on it. But I heard you yesterday say not to put animal products in a cold compost pile. Yeah, so the benefit of the hot compost pile is that I can get rid of any pathogens or any weed seeds with this hot thermophilic process. The cold compost pile does not have that hot thermophilic process, so it's not going to get rid of any of the pathogens or weed seeds or anything like that. So that's the downside of putting animal products within a cold composting. That's why whenever you Google it and everything, people will tell you, don't compost dairy or animal products or anything like that. They're right to an extent, but most of the time when it comes to compost, Google is wrong. Bye, guys. Drive safe. What's up? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Shoot him. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thank you, sir. Yeah. Right. So we were talking about the moisture. Before. This is super dry, so we got to fix that. Yep. That works. Yeah. You speak up. I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I still can't hear you. Is worm compost cold usually? No. So if it's small, just don't do small. Just do this. This is home compost right here. This is what you should do at home. This isn't like. Yeah. Yeah, you can do, like I was telling somebody earlier, like this one pile can fertilize their entire 15-acre homestead, like easily. It can fertilize way more than that as well. So like on the pathogens as well, like this is what my parents are using to get rid of some of you are familiar with Hurricane Helene and everything. This is what they're using to lock up those toxins into long and medium chain carbonic acids, or even completely just disassembling the the toxins on a smaller level. Is using these organisms in the compost. So yeah, this is also super dry. You guys, yeah. If you if you just stick right there, that'll work. I'll keep flipping right there. You're good. So the Johnson-Su method works. The Johnson-Su method definitely is a good way to compost, but the downside of the Johnson-Su method is that I have to make sure my ingredients are super, super clean, because the entirety of that pile is not going to go through that hot center, that thermophilic process in the center. So I have to make sure I'm not including weed seeds, and I have to make sure I'm not including any pathogens. But the Johnson-Su, outside of that, works very, very well. What you could do with that Johnson-Su is use super clean ingredients, and then also use finished compost, because one thing that Johnson-Su method does is really pushes fungal growth. So there's a benefit to it. Also, I can have 3 of these piles done and cured in the time it takes for one Johnson-Su bioreactor to be finished. It is a good method. I'm not knocking it at all. It just depends on your application and depending on what availability materials you have.
Just do it all. Do it all. Take your arm and do it. It's worth it.
What's up? I can't hear you. This is grass clippings. I think this is just long grass clippings. So it would have been hay if it dried. They won't propagate in this system. No, because it's gone too hot. It'll burn it up. Yep. So yeah, use Bermuda, use whatever green vegetation you have. And the ratio depends kind of on if you want to get complicated with it, the ratio kind of depends on the season and what stage your plant is in. So the older the plant, usually the higher in carbon it is. The younger the plant, like in spring, the higher in nitrogen it's going to be. Let me get this hose out of the way so I don't accidentally puncture it. Oh. I mean, so depending on what kind of microbes you're trying to get, it depends on what you're trying to get. So if you're trying to get, it kind of depends on what kind of food you're giving it as well, the microbes. So if I'm feeding sea kelp, for example, I know that's going to be super high and super hot and really good for bacteria growth. But if I'm trying to increase the fungi, then I'll use like steel-cut oats, organic steel-cut oats, to feed them. If I'm trying to stimulate nematodes, then what I'm going to do is do a nematode extract on a finished compost pile, put a half-cut potato on it, let it sit there for a couple of days, scrape that gunk off the cut side of the potato, suspend it in water, and then I can spray my nematodes everywhere. They're super attracted by that potato, that starch. So, and there's ratios depending on what you're trying to grow. So if I'm trying to grow like a garden, like row crops and everything, then I want a fungal to bacteria ratio of 1. If I'm trying to grow an orchard, then I want a fungal to bacteria of like as close to 10,000 to 1 as I can get. So 10,000 by volume, 10,000 fungi for every 1 bacteria. Most people's soils in their gardens are super, super bacteria dominant. Too many people focus on feeding the good bacteria, but not like fostering the fungi. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Like you want to feed, most people say it's like a blanket statement, most people need to foster more fungi than the bacteria. Most people are pretty squared away on the bacteria, unless you just have like straight up bare soil and has been bare forever. Now,
I was working with trying to emulate mycorrhizas with dicot, like tree nursery type environment.
so if you want to stimulate the growth of trees in nursery, you need to grow fungi. You need to grow as many and as various different kinds of fungi as possible. I don't nitpick about the specific taxonomy of the fungi. I want all of them. They can figure out the details. I would just want all of them. And I can create the environment for all of them relatively easy versus looking at it under the microscope and being like, oh, do I have this kind of fungi? Do I have that kind of fungi? I just want as many as possible. And that's actually a criteria for BioComplete, which is coined by Dr. Elaine Ingham. There's a limit on diversity or a minimum on diversity. Like I could have, the ratio right of a whole bunch of bacteria and a whole bunch of fungi, but if it's only one kind of each, then it's not fulfilling all the needs that these plants need, because some focus on a specific nutrient, some focus on different nutrients, some focus on communication, some focus on other things. So just keep that in mind. Dude, you can keep spraying if you want to. We're not going to, yeah.
No, we ought to stab that a couple times just to see where we're at.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Like what? Yeah, so if I'm trying to foster a specific microbe, then I'll adjust the food for it. So like I was saying earlier with the steel cut oats, I'll add that to the compost after I've done with the flips to feed the fungi. If I'm doing kelp, that's good for bacteria, but I've never been in the position where I'm like, I don't have enough bacteria. Bacteria are the bottom of the food chain. They're like the gazelle, so they show up pretty early. But the fungal to bacteria ratio will also determine what is and isn't going to grow well in your area. How many people have weeds in their garden? Your fungal to bacteria ratio is off. Okay. So part of it is weeds, part of it is just changing your thought process behind weeds. But yeah, you can use your weeds as an indicator of what's missing in the soil or what needs to happen in your soil. But if you're not growing, if your garden plants are competing with weeds, then your fungal to bacteria ratio is off. How many people have livestock? Have they ever been sick? Okay, that's all a soil issue. The pathogenic microbes cannot live in the soil if they're being outcompeted, if the oxygen is high enough, and if they're being outcompeted by the aerobic microbes. Okay, so how many people have lost a harvest to pests? Okay, so the soil microbiology is going to completely protect your plants. So if I have soil BioComplete soil, right, and I take a tomato seed and I put it in the ground, as that seed germinates and it hatches and it starts to grow up, it's covered in that beneficial biology. If I look at a leaf underneath the microscope, I actually can't see the surface of the tomato leaf. All I see is like a glued infrastructure of bacteria and fungi along the surface of that leaf, where the pest can't actually penetrate that armor and get to the plant itself. Like I said, this solves all the. Now I did a video a while back saying this can solve all the issues on your farm, and then somebody's like, well, how's it going to increase my credit line or my line of credit so I can buy new equipment? In that case, I'd say it's poor design. But yeah, this can solve, if not all, most of your issues on your farm just by making compost. And like I was saying before, this is not a continuous thing you have to do. As long as you don't create compaction, tilling is creating compaction, and as long as I don't create anaerobic conditions, this is a permanent fix. So I'm not against tilling completely, as long as you do it once and at the beginning to shape whatever it is you need to shape. After tilling, you should immediately seed, scatter mulch, and then water so you can get some roots to occupy that loose soil almost immediately. The microbes are what's responsible for that loose crumb structure. All right, so now that we have the top of the compost pile on this tarp, if you want to just keep watering it, yeah. This is going to become the new center. I'm going to take the old center of this compost pile and I'm going to put it in the bottom because it's already gone through that hot thermophilic process and it's already been cleansed. Then now you're not going to get like finished compost. That's not what you're going to get out of it. It's not going to look like finished compost. You just know it's been cleansed. The finished compost process comes during the curing phase, which we'll talk about at the end. So like the ratio as far as like your materials, I have a video talking about like a 2-ingredient compost pile where I have literally equal amounts of carbon and equal amounts of nitrogen, and I layer them in a cage, and then I just follow the 18-day process where I wait for 4 days after I assemble it, and then I flip every other day for 18 days, and you get a very good product after that. You do. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but remember, the more diverse your ingredients, the more diverse your biology, and the more resilient everything is going to be. Now, if you're looking for, like, if you're wondering what the carbon to nitrogen ratio is on a particular ingredient, just look it up online. There's all kinds of charts. Like the perfect ratio is about 25 or 35 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. Grass right here, that grass, early spring grass, is about the perfect ratio. It's going to be higher nitrogen, but it's about the perfect ratio of what you need for compost. Any more questions?
So a minute ago, you were saying home compost.
Uh-huh.
I think we're talking about like kitchen compost.
So
Half these people didn't raise their hands, so now you know you can make a big pile with grass clippings.
So you can make a big pile with grass. Yeah, you can make a big pile with grass clippings. Just keep in mind your ratio. I mean, your diversity is not going to be there. Now, your kitchen scraps. That's all going to count as mostly high nitrogen. But like what you can do is put your kitchen scraps in a Ziploc bag, throw them in the freezer until you're ready to make your like compost pile, and add all that into your cage. There's a difference between, a lot of people mistake rotting with composting. If I throw a banana peel on the ground, it's not really, or if I throw it all in a bucket and I let it just sit there and it rots, it's not composting. I'm fostering the anaerobic microbes, which are the pathogen microbes. Those are the bad guys. We don't want those. So like you mentioned, KNF farming and Jadam methods of like fertilizing and all that stuff. That doesn't remove, they work, they absolutely work, but it does not remove you from the fertilization process. You're still having to make those fertilizers and those liquids in order to feed your microbes and everything. I want to remove myself from the process so I can focus on other things, like expanding my garden or planting or harvesting or maintaining everything. That's what I want to focus on. I will lose my mind if I have to weed a garden. I will lose it. If I have to paint a house or if I have to weed a garden, you will see me in an insane asylum. I'll just lose my mind. Any other questions? How do I source materials whenever I'm in the city, basically? You can use other people's waste streams. This is part of permaculture. You can use other people's waste streams to make your own fertility. So think of like in the fall, depending on what city you're in, there's a lot of people who bag their leaves for you and then set them on the side of the road.
Lucky for us, everyone values this material. Unfortunately, but fortunate.
Yeah. So grab their leaves. Yeah, you can collect it all, keep it dry, keep it shaded until you have enough to make a compost pile. Just keep that in mind. You can save your materials until you're ready to make a compost pile. And then grass clippings as well. Try to find a landscape company that does bag their grass clippings and just be like, hey, don't worry about going to the landfill or the green landfill or anything. Drop them off here and I'll take them. So you can use other people's waste streams. You can also go to restaurants or coffee houses and be like, hey, I make compost. Do you guys mind throwing like all of your food scraps into a bucket and I'll come by for like a week and collect your food scraps. And then you can take those, put them in a Ziploc, freeze them until you're ready.
Is there a problem with someone who get rid of their flowers,
So it depends. In small amounts, this is where the toxins come in. In small amounts, like if I did percentage-wise, let's say I used 10% of those grass clippings in my compost pile, I'll have no issues at all. If it starts becoming like my main source, then you're going to have to start having issues. But these microbes take those toxins and they either break, like if you have archaebacteria, like the extremophiles, the ones that live on the side of volcanoes and everything, if you have those, they'll take those toxins and they'll completely dismantle those toxins. But the ones that we have access to right here in this kind of environment will actually take those toxins and they'll kind of put them in a jail. They'll put them in long and medium chain carbonic acids. So they're there, they exist, but they're in prison and they can't do anything.
Are you including Arcella in that category?
Arcella amoebas? No, that's not. That's not in Arche. No, that I wouldn't count that as like, yeah. If you have grazon on your hay, you can in small amounts. You can in small amounts. The reason that like a lot of people got with that black cow and everything is because that didn't go through a composting process. The cows ate it, they pooped it out, and then it aged for a little bit, but it didn't go through a composting process. So that's why a lot of people had issues with that grazon. Some people will tell you just stay away from it, but if it's all you got access to, it's all you got access to. And worst case scenario with your compost, the worst that can possibly happen is it just takes longer to make. So like let's say you get to the end of 30 days or 40 days or whatever, and you're like, man, this still doesn't look like compost. Change something about what you're doing and give it a little bit more time. There's a question over here. Water? Yeah. Yep. So there's a couple options. You can do that. You can put all the water in buckets and let it just off gas. Once you stop smelling that smell, then you know all the chemicals and stuff are gone, like chlorine, chloride, fluoramine, fluoride, and all that stuff. Another option is you can get a filter. I got a filter at home. I have like an RV filter that actually filters out the majority of that stuff. They don't guarantee everything, but the majority of it gets filtered out. And it lasts about 3 months of continuous use. Another option is that you get a 300-gallon IBC tote. You fill that IBC tote completely up. And then you start dumping humic acid in that. That will, once the color of the water changes just slightly, and I would go like drops at a time, not just pouring it in there, but drops at a time. You can buy humic acid on Amazon if you wanted to. And it's actually a food for fungi as well, but that's a side note. The humic acid will go through and completely dismantle those toxins that they're putting in the city water. This is crazy that we're having this conversation about the toxins that they're putting in our drinking water. So like a pinnacle compost crop that you can grow. Comfrey, so each one is going to do something a little bit different. Comfrey is an awesome activator. It's super high in nitrogen. It'll heat your compost pile up pretty quickly. But I wouldn't grow anything specifically for composting. There's usually plenty of things to grow, unless I live in like a desert. There's usually plenty of things growing around me that I can turn into compost. Or like most of your garden species, you don't eat the entire plant. So whatever I don't eat gets turned into compost. Or chicken food, which is also going to turn into compost or anything like that. You could grow a bunch of clover if you wanted to.
Great compost, high nitrogen.
Yeah, clover's high nitrogen. But I wouldn't necessarily grow clover just for compost ingredients. If I inhale some of that poop. Yeah. If I need compost inputs, then I'll grow something. But usually with clover, I use it as a cover crop. Yeah.
So you like chopping it out more and you get more benefit that way?
I leave it living. It's a living. I don't cut it down. So an example of using cover crops. Last year, I live in Texas, by the way, East Texas. Last year, I planted a clover cover crop. First time planting in this garden area. It was raw Play-Doh-like clay. Planted a clover cover crop. Let it germinate, let it grow up and everything. And then I planted sweet potatoes within that. I watered everything in, and that was the last time I watered. And I had a fantastic harvest 120 days later. I didn't water anything after that. In Texas, we have guaranteed droughts during the summer. Like guaranteed, we're not going to get rain for about 2 to 3 months every year. Yeah, minimum. Yeah. And yeah, that's the power. And what's going on with that clover? What's going on there is that it's constantly pushing down exudates into the soil, feeding my microbes. The microbes are going to help regulate water. They're going to provide whatever nutrients I need for my sweet potatoes and my clover. There's no competition for nutrients within the soil. The only competition is sunlight. That's the only competition you have to worry about. So let's say you have a cover crop, and you're noticing that some of your other vegetables or your other plants are getting shaded out. Then I would go ahead and go back and trim out my cover crop just so my other plants have access to the sun. That's the only competition. If you look at a new growth forest, you'll notice a whole bunch of trees that are closely growing together, that are very straight, they have no branches. It's because they're all racing to the sun. They're all racing to get that access to the sunlight. If you can go through, thin them out, then you'll notice they'll start spreading out their branch, they'll slow down their height and focus more on their root production, and which is way more important than their above production. The root production or the root size on a tree should be about 3 times what you see above the ground. But that's a different class. Y'all ever flipped compost and taught a class before? Man. So yeah, the fungal growth doesn't really start happening until at the end of the stage. Right now, all the fungi is in spores. It's dormant. So the fungi doesn't really start growing until it hit the curing phase, which we'll talk about that after this is flipped and like what to do after this is flipped. But yeah, that's when the fungi start going crazy. And that's part of the benefit of the curing process is that the temperatures start lowering, the fungi start having a better environment, they start hatching out of the spores, and then they start going crazy. But yeah, every time you do disturb the soil, it breaks those filamentous fungi quite a bit, which most of the time they can recover from, but you want to let them, you want to let them do their thing because whatever they're doing is freaking awesome. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh. Okay.
And the city agreed, only what they said we needed to do to make it a proper compost center.
Yeah.
Great big dose of cow manure, which ended our neighbor's access to complaining to the city, but made her even more unhappy, which made us kind of give her.
So this is the advice I follow. I'm not necessarily recommending anybody else follow it, but I don't follow unjust laws. There's that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this compost identifies as a bald eagle. You can't tell it what to do. Yeah. But yeah, if you have any weird stipulations like that, yeah, I just like some people you're never going to be able to please. I have a next door neighbor right now, impossible to please. But you know what she's going to do? She's going to sit in her house quietly and not bother me anymore. You just have to take a stand against it half the time. Like most people haven't been told to just shut up. And once you kind of take that stand and you're like, I'm not following your crap, I'm not following your laws, sit there, be quiet, shut up. Most of the time they just listen. So there's that. She does quietly mumble to herself when she's at the car, like she's walking to the car, but she's not going to do anything. So, and most people won't. Most people are all talk. Most people won't actually do anything. And most people are lazy. So like if it requires them action to actually do something, they're going to stop right there. I would think about moving. If they have stipulations on proper, like there's no regulation on the composting that's going on in that forest right there. There's no regulation on the composting that's going on in that grass right there. That would be maybe a good time to educate the city and then find out what are they willing to regulate and what are they just, mind their own business about. Yeah. You're good. Oh, crap. I didn't know Joel's here. What am I talking for? Oh, so the sheep guts? Okay, so a lot of us saw the sheep processing yesterday. I have them in a plastic bag right here. Anybody downwind, you might want to move. It's going to be funky. But those are going to be added to the center of the compost pile. Some people have complained about, like, oh, I added organs to my compost, and like I attracted coyotes and predators and neighborhood dogs and stuff like that. I've never had an issue with any of that stuff if I add it to the center of a compost pile. Now, if I add it to the top, a lot of that nitrogen is going to release and escape, and I wanted to focus in on combining with that carbon and, do its magic there. So once we get to the center, once I get the rest of this middle out, we'll add the organs to the bottom center, and then we'll add the old top, the new center into the compost cage, and then we'll add the rest of this bottom into the compost cage. What am I doing teaching a class when you're here? What do I know?
He has to appoint someone.
The chicken tractor on steroids? Right. So the only time I feed my chickens store-bought anything is whenever I have somebody watching my house for me. Otherwise, they eat food scraps. They eat garden waste. Whatever they don't eat gets, turned into compost. I feed my chickens literally everything but chicken. Everything but chicken, because keep in mind, if they don't like it and if they have free choice, they're not going to eat anything that's going to kill themselves most of the time. Goats are a different story. They will try to kill themselves every day. But yeah, the chickens, they eat the bacteria, the biota from the compost. They go through, they scratch my piles, they do the flipping for me for the most part. That system only requires 3 flips. They go through, they add nitrogen as well, so I don't have to worry about bringing as much nitrogen to the system as like a regular pile. But I also don't have a feed bill unless I have somebody watching my farm, and then I just make it simple for them and say, hey, throw them a scoop every day on top of the compost pile. That's the only time I buy feed. Right. The chickens that I got from a neighbor who's doing it like the conventional method. So I did a transition period for the chickens to make them realize, like, oh, he's not going to be buying feed for me anymore, but I have a bunch of feed in this compost. So I fermented corn for a while just to transition them into the new system that they were being put in. But that was really it. If I had raised them from chicks, as soon as they have their full feathers on, they're going outside into the chicken tractor on steroids. And that system was designed by my mentor, Jeff Lawton, over in Australia. He's a pretty cool guy. Yeah, my chickens have free access to my compost. In the chicken tractor on steroid system, there's 4 compost piles. There's a first week pile. That's where I give any kind of kitchen scraps, garden waste. I put it in that first week cage. That's the first cage they encounter as they leave the chicken coop in the morning. So they sit there, they eat, they poop, all that stuff, and then I'll layer it with carbon. At the end of every day, I'll put a little bit more carbon on top just so I can create that lasagna effect. And then after a week, that flips out, turns into my second week pile, and that's out of the cage. No more cage after the first week. They have free access to that entire pile. And then after a week, that flips into the third week pile, and then the fourth week pile. You'll notice that the chicken's favorite pile is that second and third week because that has the highest amount of biological activity going on inside of it. You fluffed it up. It's no longer compacted in that cage. You fluffed it up, and the bacteria is going crazy, and they will flatten that thing every single day. And you'll have some of the best eggs you've ever seen. So now we're done digging out the center of this pile. I'm going to start adding the top. I'm going to put in just a thin layer of this old top new center in, and then we're going to add the organs. And I'm going to add the organs to the very center of this cage. My bad. If you want to just keep watering that would be fantastic. Yeah, this should be pretty good.
I'm not going to squeeze.
I'm sorry? To the best of my knowledge, I'm sure there's some animals you wouldn't, but I can't think of one. Armadillos are going to take a minute. But yeah, fish is super high nitrogen. And if you wanted to, you could put them in a bucket with water, add a little bit of compost just so you have some microbes, and create that fish emulsion if you wanted to. Heavily dilute that, and then you can apply it directly to anything you want. Or you can just throw them in the center of your cage. Oh, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Thanks, man. All right. Any more questions?
How often are you changing it, like flipping it? Like, what's the time?
Good question. So, this is where a compost thermometer comes in handy. You don't have to, especially once you become experienced with it. You kind of understand. But I'm going to have to cut this. The compost thermometer, I'm going to assemble the pile, and then once it starts heating up, once it hits 135, that's when the clock starts ticking. So if it stays between 135 and 145, I let it sit for 3 days because that's how long it takes to kill the bad guys. If it goes above 145 to 155, I let it sit for 2 days. If it goes from 155 to 165, 24 hours, and anything above 165, flip immediately. Because once you're hit 171, then you start producing alcohol vapors, and they can combust at 171. Compost fires. And again, like I mentioned it a lot, I've never seen it happen in person, but they definitely can happen. So that's the minimum. The 18-day compost method, wow, this is funky. The 18-day compost method, you let it sit for 4 days, and then you flip every other day after that. You flip on the 4th day, and then every other day after that. Alrighty, so these are all the organs from the sheep, and this is going to be super high nitrogen. And we're going to let it sit there. The only thing in here that won't compost is that ear tag. Everything else will disappear through this composting process. Actually, sorry, I won't put that next to you guys. Can I rinse my hands off real quick? Thanks, buddy.
Why?
All right, so now I'm going to cover that up with a lot of carbon. Y'all keep asking questions. I want you guys to go home and make compost after this. Stop buying the Khyber Bosch method of composting. Stop buying your inputs. All your fertility is on your property already. You just have to know how to work with it. Sure. Yeah, thanks, man. All righty. Now I can talk. Yeah. So this is where that carbon and nitrogen comes in handy. If I have a ton of wood chips, wood is it varies quite a bit. If I were to chip up that trunk, I'm looking at 500 to 600 to 1 as far as the carbon and nitrogen. The only way to get enough nitrogen to interact with that wood chips is by increasing the surface area. If I increase the surface area too much, I get sawdust. Sawdust tends to create an anaerobic condition because it cakes together. That's not saying don't use wood chips. Just keep in mind that that's going to happen, that you're not going to get your finished compost that you're used to seeing at the end of it. What you'll get is composted material glued to your wood chips, which is still fantastic. Dad calls that fortified mulch, and that's what we use around our fruit trees and everything like that. Now, if I were to go to the ramial part of the tree, I just learned this word yesterday. If I go to the ramial part of the tree, which is the 1 to 2 year new growth on the tips of the branches, that's way lower on carbon. There's a lot more nitrogen involved there. So what I can do there is chip that up or chop it up with the machete if you want to. Jeff had me doing that when he wanted me to shut up one time. I was chopping it up with the machete into tiny little pieces. And then you can use that as your compost, and that's going to increase the amount of air that's actually in your soil. It's also going to compost a lot faster because the carbon to nitrogen ratio is way lower, and you can actually get enough nitrogen to interact with that carbon without having to increase the surface area. Ideally, in perfect compost, if you're looking for perfect finished compost, just for your own pleasure, ideally, every part that you put in your compost cage would be anywhere between 1/4 inch to an inch in diameter. So somewhere around that size, and then you'll get pretty good compost, finished looking compost at the end of it. Don't stress about that. Now, certain circumstances, I would run over them with the mower and then try to chip it up a little bit. Whenever I'm using leaves, I usually run that over with the mower with the bagger on it just to chop it up a little bit. Because if I put full leaves in my compost cage, they're going to come back together. They're going to create this mat layer. And what's that going to create? An anaerobic layer. And I need to do two things: avoid compaction and avoid anaerobic conditions. And my fertility is on autopilot. As long as I do that, I don't have to worry about it anymore. Cool. Go ahead.
So right now it's not ideal situation how we're doing what we're doing. Typically, they not want to see large chunks of manure You want to try to bust them out if you can.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world, but try.
Yeah. Because what's that large chunk going to create? An anaerobic condition. And we want to avoid that by at all possible. And it's also compacted. But yeah, you're 100% right. We want to avoid like any kind of chunks. And if you see any chunks as you're flipping your compost, you want to fluff it up as much as possible. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there something natural I could add to reduce the odor in my compost?
Compost. So if I'm trying to reduce the odor, okay, so hold on, let me elaborate on that. If you're trying to reduce the odor in your compost, obviously right now it's going to be some funky stuff because we just added day-old sheep organs to it. It's going to be some funky stuff. But if you're noticing that your compost is like slimy, it's wet for an extended period of time, and it stinks like rotten material, then you need to add carbon. Your ratio is off, so you add carbon. Let's say it's very, very dry, doesn't really hold moisture very well, it's very sticky, a lot of recognizable ingredients, you're going to add nitrogen. So that's a little litmus test that you can use to add one or the other. But again, if in your situation, just add carbon, take a little bit more time, and then you'll have finished compost. Joel, I remember I did the Polyface Intensive Discovery Seminar. Ooh, I said that fast without messing up. Yeah, I did that, and he was showing us an example of this huge bin that he has full of wood chips where he composts whole dead cows. Am I correct? Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. There's multiple different methods of composting. A lot of them work. Some of them don't. Okay, here's a litmus test. If you're watching YouTube and whoever's teaching you this has blue hair, probably not a good idea to listen to their advice. And I'm thinking of a channel in particular. We can lift this up and actually dump it into the cage. Maybe. Oh, hold on one second. I'm in this wrinkly tarp. Let's dump that side. Thank you, guys. All right. So now we're going to put this tarp off to the side, and we'll cover the cage back up after we finish. So now, thank you guys so much. Now we're going to put the bottom back in the cage. The bottom is going to become the new top. Remember, everything just moved down one, and the bottom became the new top. And then you would repeat this process one more time, and then we'll talk about curing here in a minute. You're cute. You're so cute. Got this cute little baby just looking at me. Didn't think about it. And honestly, I'm kind of trying to figure out how to compost plastic. Like, there's already a ton of microplastics in the soil. Like, one ear tag isn't going to really add much to that. But I'm trying to, worms. There are organisms that will, okay, so there's this farm in Chernobyl called Anastasia Farms. After Chernobyl, it might not be called that. Something along those lines. Anastasia Farms? Okay. They, after that whole Chernobyl event, they didn't leave. They just stayed there. They're like, whatever, if we're going to die, we're going to die, but we're going to do it right here. That farm composted like crazy. And if you go test their farm today, and even like almost immediately after that, they had no detectable radiation. No matter the means of testing you did, if you did the Geiger counter, if you did scalar testing, any of that, had no detectable amounts of radiation. What were they doing? They were making very fungal dominant compost for their gardens and everything. And they're still in function. They're still in operation right now. No issues at all. They're still alive. By all metrics of measuring, they should have been dead by now. Sunflower, when it comes to certain plants locking up toxins, I would say that's to an extent. They'll lock it up into the carbon structures of the plant itself, but as soon as they die and start breaking down, they're releasing it again. So, like if I were to grow sunflowers to soak up radiation, I got to figure out what to do with those sunflowers. I could compost them and lock them up in medium and long-chain carbonic acids and have a permanent fix, but it just kind of depends. And you'll notice that's the classic permaculture answer is it depends. Because it really, really does depend on the ecosystem, the environment, your abilities, stuff like that. Keep the questions coming. Also, don't raise your hand because I can't see you.
Can I point something out about this man right here? I just recently discovered his works, and I praise him for that. And he's been blessed greatly by the Almighty. I'm certain of it. All this should be available for recording. All this is moving too fast. And if you try to catch up to some of this through the internet, besides this source, you're you're going to go down a lot of rabbit holes that are going to get you sidetracked. So go to this, listen again, take notes, and learn it, because this is important work for this planet.
Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. I'm not worthy of that praise. I didn't discover any of this stuff. Yeah. Oh, man. I appreciate it. What was that? How often should you put your compost on your garden? So if I make compost extracts, what I was talking about at the beginning, and we'll talk more about uses after this, but how often do I have to add it to my compost or add it to my garden? So remember I said at the beginning, using this as a planting medium is the least efficient way to use your compost. I want to strip the organisms off, dilute them, and then spread them around. And the dilution will matter, depend on, what your soil is already at. But if I apply 3 compost extract dilutions to my soil 3 times in one season, right before rain events, and as long as I don't create compaction or anaerobic conditions, it is a permanent fix. Now, how do I create anaerobic conditions? I use the Khyber-Bosch method of nitrogen-based fertilizers and create salt in my system. I leave bare soil. Look around. Nature doesn't leave any of this soil bare, and if it is bare, it's not bare for long. Also, improper grazing practices. That's another way to create compaction, which also creates anaerobic conditions. If you want to learn how to graze, check out this gentleman right here. He's a fantastic grazer, fantastic teacher.
The problem with compaction too is you're not necessarily, if it's too compacted, there may be some aeration or tillage required.
Yeah.
You can do this in several years up to multiple years, but you want to do it in months and a year or two. All of these things.
And I'm not necessarily against tilling either. I understand you have to move some soil around in order to get this shape that you want or something that's easy to work with. I tilled at home. I tilled my garden beds just to form beds. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but that was the last time I tilled. I'm not creating any more compaction, and I got the shape that I want. And I immediately seeded with crimson clover directly after that, and then scatter mulch on top of that so I could increase germination rates and all that. But yeah, if done properly, now talking about tilling, there are ways to till without every tilling method except for one creates compaction, meaning mechanical means. Yeoman's plow, it's a way of subsoiling. So if I till 6 inches, that 7th inch is going to become super compacted. If I do it again, it's going to become even more compacted. And the plants aren't going to be able to penetrate that super compacted over 300 psi layer within human lifetimes. You'll look at Indonesia and you'll see some trees that are growing roots through rocks and all that stuff. That wasn't done in human lifetimes, and that was also done in a rainforest where there's no dormant cycle or anything. But yeah, this can be a permanent fix as long as you foster the soil. If you focus on just growing soil microbes, everything kind of takes care of itself. Gardening is a byproduct. Beef is a byproduct. Chicken is a byproduct of good soil conditions. Now, you can create compaction in anaerobic conditions by overgrazing or keeping your animals in one spot for too long. But a fantastic way of composting is also correctly grazing. You're creating, you can build soil going up, and you can also build soil going down once you penetrate that compaction layer. There's no lower limits to soil. There's no lower limits until you hit maybe a basalt layer. But if you have just straight up soil, there's no lower limits. What other questions you got? Absolutely. Paper is just going to be a carbon input. I would be careful using too thick of a layer of paper, though, because, again, it'll compact. Yeah, even if you run it through a shredder, I would mix it within the other ingredients. So that way it's not just one layer of shredded paper.
Pay attention to the source, because eyeglass and certain paints and things like that try to be as plain, black and white, or plain cardboard. The glue strips, stickers. If you're gonna, don't let it hinder you, but that's the step.
So there's a guy named Bill Mollison. He was one of the founders of permaculture along with Toby Hemingway. He was using old carpet to mulch his trees with. The carpet's still there. And this was like in the 70s. The carpet's still there, but it still provided a nice aerated environment for the microbes to thrive. I'm not saying use carpet, but yeah, it's an option. So yeah, you were talking about the cardboard. The only thing I look for in cardboard, I've seen it all decompose at this point. The only thing I look for cardboard is taking the tape off. And if you don't take the tape off, it's going to present itself on the surface of the soil, and then you can pick it up then if you want to, but just do it on the front end. It's much easier. What other questions? Yeah. I am waging war against compost barrels. I understand, I really understand that that's the only way some people can even kind of do it. Because flipping this, you see me, I'm also teaching a class, but I'm kind of out of breath right now. If I was doing it without teaching, I'm not, that out of shape. I can do it without being out of breath. But, yeah, it does take a toll, and I understand. In that scenario, what I would recommend for composting is chop and drop. I would grow like a cover crop with the intent of chopping it and letting it decompose in place. Composting is going on everywhere. This is just a very intentional method of fixing my problems permanently, as long as I don't create what? Y'all got it. Yeah.
Where the weeds are, you get some grass clippings. Try to kind of be careful not to burn the stems with that nitrogen that's so high. Aerate it, fluff it, or allow it to dry in the sun for a little bit first. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
When you run it, you get some leaves, put some leaves on there. Put some mulch on there.
Yeah, don't tell them. And I understand also another issue with the compost. So a couple issues with the compost tumbler. It doesn't allow enough ventilation for oxygen to transfer. So that's a big issue. But also everywhere that compost comes in contact with that plastic, it's going to create that anaerobic layer. As I said earlier, there's a difference between rotting and composting. Rotting is an anaerobic process. Composting is an aerobic process, for the most part. Biofilm, yeah. What else? I heard somebody else say something.
You were talking about herbicides and grass like that.
Yep.
Source wisely.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Another way to source unsprayed grass clippings, go to poorer communities. They ain't worried about their grass. They ain't spraying nothing on it. Yeah. Find yards with weeds, go there, get that. Also, you could get paid to take other people's waste streams. You could start a little landscaping company where you're not necessarily worried about, or lawn care company where you're not necessarily worried about getting paid. You're just like, hey, I want to collect this guy's fertility and turn it into fertility of my own. Buy literally $100 bagger push lawnmower. That's what I did. And just go offer to mow other people's yards for the price of the fuel that you're going to use. And then you're good to go. You have clean inputs. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how to estimate the fungal to bacteria ratio. Your friend, I'm assuming this is a plug. I appreciate you. But, okay, so depending on what you're wanting to plant, determines the ratio that you want. If I'm wanting to plant a garden, I want a 1-to-1 ratio, fungi to bacteria. If I'm wanting to do blueberry bushes and stuff like that, then I want to up it to about 50-to-1 ratio. If I'm wanting to do fruit trees, I want a minimum of 100-to-1 ratio. And if old growth forests, there's a whole lot of fungi, very, very little bacteria. It's 10,000 to 1, in your old growth forest, especially up in the Pacific Northwest. That's what you want to kind of aim towards, if at all possible. How do you determine what your ratio is? You can there's some visual indicators you can use. If you're growing weeds in your garden, you know that you have too high bacteria and there's not enough fungi. You're below that 1-to-1 ratio. You're pushing more like 0.25, 0.5, something along those lines. Because weeds cannot grow in healthy soil. They're not invited by the soil. The soil is not the weed's job has been done already because you have healthy soil, and then it's also not going to be provided with the nutrients it needs to grow. So that's one way to tell. Another way to tell is you can send your soil to me. And actually, at this festival, I'm offering $40 off of soil biology testing. And what you'll do is you'll mail me a sample of your soil. I will look at it underneath the microscope, see what organisms are there, if there's any bad guys, and then I'll come up with a plan for you guys. After I assess your soil, I'll give you a phone call, talk about what to do, and then also send you a hard copy. But I'll talk about what to do to fix your soil permanently, and then you'll be good to go. And like I said, if you do everything properly, if you just follow the instructions, it's 3 applications at worst of compost extract to your soils, and it's a permanent fix as long as you don't create compaction or anaerobic conditions. And then depending on what you're wanting to grow, like I said earlier, is going to determine what ratio we're looking at. But I can tell you right now, most people's soils are bacteria dominant, very, very little fungi. As like a general statement, I can say everybody generally needs to increase their fungi because fungi are pretty picky. They don't just grow in soil like this. Like there might be a little bit of fungi in this soil, but probably very little. Because we do see some weed indicators out here. We do see some goldenrod. We do see some other plants that aren't necessarily grass. Grass thrives in a 1-to-1 ratio as well. If I can increase the fungi in this soil, which is a compost extract application right before it rains, make sure the organisms don't dry out and everything, then we'll be good to go. Now, this compost pile, other than some of the smaller stuff, is flipped. Everything moved down one and the bottom went to the top. What I'm going to do here is let this heat up again, like you're asking about the temperatures and everything. I'm going to let this heat up again. Once it hits 135, the clock starts ticking. And if it doesn't reach 135, then I know I need to add a high nitrogen source to this to get that temperature going. The temperature is derived from the activity of, there's kids here, I'll be quiet, but the microbes are replicating. They're reproducing. Like that's where the temperature comes from. It's crazy, but that's where it comes from. So if I need a higher temperature, if it's not reaching 135, yep. That's how we all got here. But that's where the temperature comes from is, I thought you were going to say it. Yeah, sex. They're heating up the pile. So if I'm low on nitrogen, if it's not reaching a high enough temperature, what can I do? I can pee on it. For me, it's a little bit easier than maybe you, but pee on it. Pee in a jug, accumulate it. I usually try to fill a gallon up and then I'll pee it on a cold compost pile just to heat it up. I recently did a video. I didn't realize it was like the most controversial thing I could have done, but I take methylene blue, turns your pee blue, and I peed in the jug, and I was like, hey, y'all, guess what this is? People lost their freaking minds. I didn't realize it was a political statement to take methylene blue, but you can do that. You can pee in a jug, and then you can pour it in your compost pile, and they'll heat it up like crazy. People lost it. Lost it. Yeah, it did look like some Baja Blast. So that's urine is a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, if you're on pharmaceuticals, like if you're on like things like Prozac or something similar to that, I'm not bashing you by any means. Just don't do that because it will accumulate in your food. And what you think you're dosing yourself with is actually going to be higher if you're eating what you get out of your garden. So keep that in mind. If you're on any kind of pharmaceuticals, maybe don't do that because it will accumulate in your food if you're not careful. But that's the only waste stream from a human I use. As far as like human manure goes, there's a very, very correct way to compost human manure. Every other method is wrong. Like unless you're doing it correctly. And I don't even recommend doing it because there's so many other options. Don't worry about human manure. Dig a hole, bury it, let the trees deal with it. So what I'm going to do for now, let's pretend that was my last flip. If that was my last flip, I would get rid of this compost cage and I'd use it for a new compost pile. I would let it sit here, shaded, properly hydrated. Remember, if I grab a handful of it, squeeze it together, I should have one drop form and fall. That's a perfect 50% hydration within the compost pile. And also, Bobby, you're going to have to let me know when I'm out of time because I spend the rest of this day talking about compost. Cool. So I squeeze it. Okay. One drop will form and fall, and that's perfect 50% hydration. I want to maintain that. So if I have it, let's say in a barn, it doesn't necessarily need access to the sunlight, but it will benefit from direct access to the ground because it's going to rob, in a beneficial way, it's going to rob some of the bacteria and fungi that are already existing in your soils. Like some of the spores of the fungi will start hatching and start replicating and start becoming filamentous fungi and everything. But I'm going to let it sit, and I'm going to let it come down to ambient temperature. So the center of the compost pile is no longer heating up. It's no longer getting hot. It's going to be close to the ambient temperature outside, minus any like midnight fluctuations or early morning fluctuations or anything like that. It's going to become a stable temperature. At that point, I know my fungi are blowing up in there. So I have the bacteria and the fungi. They're both blowing up in there. That's going to start making the predators start hatching. So a lot of my amoeba are going to start hatching, and they're going to start get that nutrient cycling going. Like amoeba can eat 10,000 fungi in a very short period of time, poop all those guys out, benefit my plants around it. That's whenever you start getting the fertilization directly to your plants after the lower level guys start getting eaten. My amoeba are going to start hatching. Then the amoeba, their predators are going to get attracted. Like the amoeba and ciliates, to a certain extent, ciliates can be good, can be bad. You want to see a little bit of that, but not many. But my flagellates, I want to see those guys coming up. And they all look different on the microscope. Kind of hard to show you guys. But yeah, my amoeba, my ciliates, my flagellates, those are all like mid-level predators. Think of those as like jackals. Like a lion can eat a jackal, but the jackal also eats other things. And then once those guys start thriving, then my nematodes are going to start coming into play. I have fungal-feeding nematodes. I have bacterial-feeding nematodes. I have omnivorous nematodes, which can eat fungi, bacteria, really whatever they can fit in their mouth. And then I have predatory nematodes that eat other nematodes. So if you think about the amount of nutrients that one nematode is accumulating, that's multiplied by having your predatory nematodes that are eating other nematodes, which is fantastic. And then after I get my nematodes, then I start getting my earthworms, which are like the top dog, and all kinds of worms. Those are the top dogs in the soil. And then it rains, and then they come to the surface, and then they're introduced to birds, and then there's all that. But any questions thus far?
You mentioned using oat flour to increase the fungal growth.
Yep.
At what point did you add that in?
Okay, so let's say I've had this curing for a while and it's time for me to test my compost. I look at it under the microscope and I'm making this compost pile with the intent of fertilizing or fixing my orchard, right? So I need a high 100-to-1 fungi to bacteria ratio. And I'm noticing I'm lacking the fungi. Like I have my bacteria, I have my predators, but I need the fungi. At that point, once it starts curing and the temperature has gone down, that's when I would add my steel-cut oats, organic steel-cut oats, to the surface. Now, at this point, we also need to be careful about what we add to our compost pile because it's not going to go through that thermophilic phase anymore. So we don't want to add any pathogens, which will get out-competed anyway because there's high amounts of oxygen and other guys that do well in that area. But we also don't want to add anything that's going to be providing any toxins or seeds because that's not going to get, taken care of. Toxins to a certain extent, but like the wheat seeds, that's not going to die in the hot center of this compost cage. So that's when I want to be careful. But I would add steel-cut oats to increase the fungi during the curing phase after everything is cooled off. I would give it about a week, and then I'd reassess. And typically, a week is about as long as it takes for the steel-cut oats to feed your fungi to multiply as well. Now, another thing, if I need to increase fungi in my compost cage at the end of the curing process, that you can add is spent mushroom blocks. So there's a lot of mushroom farmers. It's become a popular thing. There's a lot of hipsters growing mushrooms and stuff like that. If you can tolerate the hipsters long enough to do business with them, then try to get their spent mushroom blocks and add it during the curing phase. You're gonna get like a high amount. You're not a hipster. You're cool. Yeah. You add your spent mushroom blocks to the compost after it's going through the curing process, and then you're just going to get fungi blowing up. Like my dad's compost right now has like oyster mushrooms growing out of the side of the compost. It's fantastic. Also, your fungi can deal with a lot more of your toxins than your bacteria are going to deal with. Now, the bacteria that deal with a lot of toxins are the archaea bacteria. Those are found like on the rim of a volcano They're the ones that they said survived in space, whatever you want to believe on that. They're the ones that said that survived in space without getting into that topic. Whether or not it did, I don't know. But they're the ones that survive in very, very extreme scenarios, extreme areas. There's a Adirondack desert. There's archaeobacteria where there's nothing else surviving. There's archaeobacteria in the sands and the silts in that desert that you can find. The Sahara, there's archaeobacteria. Very low numbers, but they exist and they're there. So yeah, those are the ones that deal with forever chemicals. For those of you that don't know, my dad is over at Permaculture Farm. They had Hurricane Helene, which we'll be talking more about tomorrow. But they had Hurricane Helene come in. Along the river, the French Broad, there were PVC manufacturers, and then there was also a nuclear fuels facility in Irwin, Tennessee. Everywhere that they did this soil analysis to see what toxins are in the soil, they came up with PVC manufacture. Oh, and there were also barrels from Oak Ridge that popped up out of nowhere. So it makes it suggest that there's like a depository somewhere along in those mountains. Everywhere they tested, they had forever chemicals, dioxins, and nuclear radiation. Everywhere they tested, that was affected, even if they weren't by the French Broad River. They used compost, and they used plants along with archaeobacteria that they're adding to the compost. And in 5 months, that soil is cleaner than it was before Hurricane Helene. There's no more radiation. There's no more forever chemicals that have been completely destroyed and locked up in medium and long chain carbonic acids. So that should make you rethink about what properties are now available for your homesteading. Like, you can now buy crappy denuded properties because you know everybody here has the ability to now fix any soil they come across. Now, one thing that I would talk about is if you're in the tropics or subtropics and you have very sandy soil, doing compost by itself will work, but it's going to take more than 3 applications. You're going to need to provide a home for your microbes. So the answer to that is making charcoal and then inoculating it, turning it into biochar. So during the curing process, that's when I would add the biochar to the compost. And the biochar acts as like an apartment complex for your microbes. It gives them a place to live and a place to multiply. And they can also eat their house as well, that carbon structure, and derive nutrients from that as well. But they'll give them a place to live, so that way they can eventually glue themselves to the sands, the big sand particles in your tropic and subtropical environments. Otherwise, the downside, so a tropic and subtropical environment, 90% of the life is above the soil. If I go to an arid environment, 90% of the life is below the soil. It depends on like what's going to survive there. In the tropical environment, every time it rains, which it rains a lot, it quickly soaks into the soil, and it doesn't stay around long enough for the microbes to stay there and stick themselves to the organic matter and create that perfect crumb structure, that 70% cocoa chocolate bar color in your soils. So biochar provides a home for your microbes in sandy soils. You had a question?
With your char that you're sticking in there, do you have a reference on how large, dust, small particles, right size?
Right. So whenever I make biochar, I have like chunks of wood, and whenever I'm done with the process, they still look like chunks of wood, just way, way lighter in weight and then way more brittle. What I do is I put them in a grain sack, and then I just pound them with a hammer or run over them with my truck a few times, and I create a powder there. I wouldn't spend too much time trying to get as fine of a powder as possible. Just whatever you feel like doing is going to be beneficial. The big chunks of it limit the amount of organisms that can actually inoculate that charcoal. So think of it this way: if I can increase the surface area of my biochar, more microbes are going to be able to inhabit those carbon structures of the biochar. That's the main benefit of biochar. A lot of people will make charcoal, add it to their soils, and they're like, wow, my soil is worse than when I started. That's because you didn't inoculate it first. So what you're going to do is actually rob the microbes from your soil until the biochar is inoculated, and then it's going to start being beneficial to the area around it. If you look at the Amazon rainforest, that is one big food forest. That is one big human-managed food forest. The ratio of fruit trees to support species is off. It should be for every 10,000 support species I have one fruit-bearing tree. It's about 50-50 in some spots. That's crazy. But the way they were able to propagate and grow so well down there is that they were making a product called Terra Preta. We're not entirely sure what the recipe is completely, But we know that a lot of it was inoculated charcoal turned into biochar, providing a home for the microbes, allowing them to glue themselves to the sand, silt, and clays. Mostly sand. What was your question? Oh, were you just flailing? Sorry. No, you're good. Any other questions? Yeah.
Now, I have confirmed and tested the biochar through the wood chipper in my search for reducing the labor, the beating with a gunny sack or driving over, pouncing on concrete. I did all that. I put it in a cement mixer with rocks and tumble, and then now I've got a sack that don't let all the dust out, put it over the wood chipper, pour it in, and out comes perfectly sized biochar, equivalent to any of the professionally acclaimed
Yeah.
that are available out there.
That's fantastic. Yeah, wood chipper. And honestly, if you have a wood chipper, that's a good place to reduce the size of a lot of your inputs. So if you mow your grass, or if you just like, let's say you had a scythe and you scythe a bunch of grass, then you need to reduce that size a little bit, if at all possible. If not, don't worry about it. It'll still decompose. But if you could throw it into that hopper of the wood chipper, that would be a good way to reduce the size. If I had a bunch of leaves, reduce the size with the wood chipper. Yeah, the wood chipper is a fantastic way to reduce the size of everything. Jenny? So I know you're from Alaska, so let's talk about Alaska. Yes, you can absolutely do the hot composting method in Alaska. I just wouldn't do it during the coldest part of your winters, or I would do it inside of a building during the coldest part of your winters. But the microbes in Alaska are adjusted to the Alaskan climate, so they're going to be able to handle it. And also, a fun fact, the fastest rate of naturally recorded decomposition actually happens underneath snowpack. Because underneath snowpack, it's a very stable climate. The microbes can adjust, and they're getting that slow drip of water consistently underneath the snowpack. So if let's say I live in a climate where I'm guaranteed going to get snow every single year, and it's going to pack up, and then it's going to thaw during the spring. If I can, before then, pile my gardens with clean organic matter beforehand, let the snow come in, I won't have recognizable organic matter once everything thaws, because it's going to be an accelerated rate of decomposition. It actually decomposes faster underneath snowpack than it does in a rainforest, which is fantastic. But to finish your question, yes, absolutely compost, even if you're in cold climates and even if you're in hot climates, your microbes are going to be adjusted according to the climate you live in. Now, if I took this compost pile and I brought it to you in Alaska, these guys are going to die. So my dad uses the example, if I take a Kenyan and I put him in Alaska, he's going to die. If I take an Inuit and I put him in Kenya, he's going to die, even though they both separately thrive in their own climates very, very well. What was your question?
I was just going to say, composting at any level is worth it.
Yeah.
I've worked in the nursery industry in Oregon for 10 years, and I had the privilege of being able to do whatever I wanted with the program.
Mm-hmm.
I started out spraying pesticides, and during the last half of my 10 years, I had a new manager who basically let me do what I want, and I eliminated all insecticides except for the ones required by USDA out of the spray program by the use of inoculated compost in the field.
That's fantastic. But yeah, you're 100% right. Composting on any level is 100% worth it. So again, grazing correctly, that's composting. You have your cows come through, they're eating the grass, they're pooping on it. Whatever they're not eating, they're stomping down. If you're grazing correctly, if your paddocks are small enough for a single day of grazing, they're going to compost in place. That's composting in place. And then if you have your chickens come through, they'll break up that manure, break up those patties into smaller pieces, incorporate that into the soil. That's composting. If you do chop and drop in your garden, that's composting. Let's say you're trying to get rid of, let's say you grew Brussels sprouts, right? And now you're done with Brussels sprouts. You grow all your Brussels sprouts, you harvested them. Now, instead of pulling the entire plant out of your garden, you can chop it off at the ground level, take that top part, add it to your compost cage or your chicken tractor on steroids or whatever you want to do, and then let those roots down below decompose. That's composting. Jeff Lawton simplified it. If I have a pile of sawdust on the ground, that's carbon. And if I pee on it, that's nitrogen. That's composting. It can be as simple as that. The benefit of this method right here is that it's very intentional. I'm doing it to remove myself from the fertility loop and get rid of all of my garden problems, all of my orchard problems, all of my food forest problems, and all of my animal diseases. I'm looking now with animal diseases, it could be poor soil or it could be poor genetics. Most of the time, if you can fix the environment, unless it's like horrible genetics, you can fix the issues. I would imagine that you have way less disease on your property than the neighboring properties, right? Yeah. And he's grazing correctly as well. But according to your neighbors, you have making them eat their own manure, right? Yeah.
Got serious into the compost deal on the nursery. I was able to step it up to where I found a reliable producer of compost with consistent compost, and they were bringing compost to me, and I was inoculating with my own compost tea.
Yeah.
And
that brings up a good topic.
then that within like just a few days, that semi-load of compost would be a little bitty pile because it would take what they called finished compost and bring it down to whole compost at maybe a third the size of the semi-load.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that real quick. So you're thinking, okay, cool. I know some places that make compost that I can go buy it from. In fact, Lawrence has a section where you can go and get like the town's decomposed organic matter. All of that sucks. Like, you cannot buy fantastic compost unless you go to 3 different people. Me, which I'm not even selling it yet. Me, my parents over in North Carolina, and they ain't selling it. Or Dr. Elaine Ingham all the way in Oregon, and she barely sells it. Like, you have to. We're at a stage right now. Him. All right, hit him up if you're in the area. Go ahead.
Blast it out. That is what, when I was in search of good compost, I think, oh, cool, I got the answer. Compost, and then I got introduced to Elaine. Without going into all of that, I learned to use the microscope, and I wanted to see biological compost. I couldn't find it anywhere on my property, so I'm going to all the stores and buying all the compost and buying everything. I'm looking, I'm searching, and it was rare. I rarely found it. There was this one brand, I couldn't find the name, in Menards. It was a $3 bag of mushroom fungus that was pretty kick butt. And that was it. So
yeah.
I just want to throw that in. And a real quick thing on the ingredient, and important worth mentioning, ingredients toward your inputs. We went to biochar, mineral rock dust.
Yeah, volcanic rock dust as well.
About, and it could be just okay,
yeah.
Whatever it is, what it does on a quantum level that we're just kind of tapping into. And there are papers out, but it's very little talked about. But a little bit of rock dust in there does some alchemy that is out of this world.
There's something called like transmutation. It's observable. It exists for like it exists. It works. How it works, I don't know, but it works. I'll let the microbes figure that out. It's kind of crazy. Like, okay, so if a fungi over here on this side of the forest derives some nutrient that this tree on the other side of the forest needs, it doesn't take that travel time to get it to that tree. Somehow it's instantly there. How that happens, I don't know. Dr. Elaine Ingham discovered it, or not discovered it, but she observed it when she was trying to figure out the travel time of nutrients through the root system. She found a tree that was above this cavern. It was 400 feet above this cavern. She dyed the tree, and instantly down below this cavern, same root system, the blue dye started dripping. It was instant. How that happened, don't know, but it happens. Biological transmutation. I don't know how that works, but real quick, you can buy crappy compost. You can buy it for bottom dollar, as cheap as you can find, and you can inoculate that with your good homemade compost. You can't buy good compost. If you buy it from the city municipality, if you buy bagged stuff, all of it is going to be either sterile or they're going to do a nematode extract right before bagging or packaging, which nematodes without the prey are going to die. So it's useless. So if you're going to buy compost, I wouldn't buy compost because you're going to get, top dollar. They're going to charge top dollar for that. What I would do is buy the cheapest topsoil fill dirt you can find, because you're going to inoculate it the same way, and these microbes are going to adjust it into this perfect crumb structure that's going to provide fertility for your entire property. Also, do not spend money on the high dollar bagged compost. Like unless it's dirt right.
That's probably about a $600 to $800 pile of compost.
Or if you're Dr. Elaine Ingham, this is a $5,000 pile of compost. So, yeah.
So it will escalate to potentially 1,500 or more. Or I'm going to perfect my windrows and I'll make it available for hundreds versus thousands.
So yeah, get his information after this class. It's going to be fantastic. Yeah, go his route if you're in the local area. Buy his compost, but don't buy mushroom compost. Mushroom compost all sucks. If I get mushroom compost, I'm thinking under the microscope, I should see filamentous fungi. I don't see a single thing. What I see is a lot of sterile organic matter. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Don't buy any last questions?
What if one of your goals besides fertilizing plants is to grow worms?
So worms will be, if my goal is to grow worms, okay, so let's say I have a vermicompost setup. What I would feed my worms is compost. That's a perfect feed for your red wrigglers, your composting worms and stuff like that. Make compost, let it cool down, and then feed it to your worms. And they're going to increase there's very rare specific bacteria that exists within a worm's gut. Everything, like worms have the Midas touch. Everything a worm touches turns into a beneficial bacteria. So if I have a vermicompost setup and I want to increase the glues in my, like the gels in my compost, and if I want to get that rare bacteria, then I would feed my compost to the worms, and it still provides an environment where the fungi can still grow. So I think that's about it on time. Bobby gave me the 10 minutes, like 12 minutes ago. Yeah, we got 2 minutes left. So if you guys want a soil biology test, come see me in my tent. If you want a permaculture consultation, come see me in my tent. Thank you guys so much for your time. And if you have any more questions, come see me at the tent. I'll be here all weekend. Thank you. Thanks, buddy.